to everyone for what they need. I mentioned before, we're going to catch up on what we're recording. I'm missing the section from Shabbos, from this past Shabbos. I'm just going to go back to that section so we can learn it together. Obviously, we didn't learn it last week, and also have it recorded so we have the entire Torah with Hashem self-recorded. It's an interesting section of Chumash. Talks about a lot of the commitments and donations. It talks about the 3 holidays. We're going to learn a lot about Pesach. We'll learn about the donation of the firstborn and some of the commitments that the Jewish people had to give, some other rules involving these things. So let's learn it together. Kol ha'bachar, every firstborn, male, asher Yuvale b'vkarcha, that will be born in your animals, in your v'karcha, v'tzaincha, from your cattle, or from your flock, from your sheep. Hazachar, that's male, as I said. So, which means one of the donations that people have to give, and as we say always, in those days people were farmers. That was a major part of the, the different donations. Like today, you give a tithe, whatever. In those days, one of the donations that they would have to give was the firstborn of every animal, male firstborn of every animal, firstborn if it was male, you would have to donate it and give the takdish la Hashem. You should make it holy to Hashem, the God, your God. You shouldn't work it. It's holy. You're not allowed. It becomes a very high status of holiness. And if it was a firstborn animal that could be used for some kind of work, a cattle or like sagus b'char tzeinach, or if it's like a sheep that you could benefit from its wool, you're not allowed to, because it's holy. It's not only allowed to be used for very specific things. It has to be given to the kohen. Kohen has to eat it. Will eat it, and so on. It has to be brought in that holy status as a sacrifice and cannot be used for whatever you want to. Now, some information about this firstborn animal, Rashi learns from the verse. Let's see what Rashi is telling us that we learn out from some of the requirements over here. So he says that don't think you could flip donations here. In other words, if it's born in as a firstborn animal that has to be brought to the kohen as a firstborn sacrifice, can't also make it, let me make it another sacrifice. You know what I mean? Like, okay, let me get 2 for the price of 1. So he's telling you no. It has to stay as it's designated for its original sacrifice. And also, you have to say, behold, this is my firstborn animal sacrifice. Now, he does share something interesting here, which I want to get into something of the benefits of when you have a sacrifice. There's some kind of personal benefit. Now, you say, what kind of personal benefit is there if it's a donation? In other words, Hashem says you have to donate it. So what kind of benefit can the owner get out of it? And the answer is that imagine if you had to give a kohen your firstborn animal, all the kohanim want it. So, like if somebody is the grandfather, I think it brings an example of his grandson is a kohen, and he's like, do me a favor, like you could get some favors maybe out of it by giving that specific kohen, giving it to his family, giving it to his grandchild, the animal. Maybe the guy will wash your car for you. I don't know, we'll do something else. In other words, there's a certain value of, I know I have to donate it to the kohen, but which kohen am I going to donate it to? So if I give it to a certain family of kohanim, I'm benefiting out of that. So there is some benefit there out of that system, and you could sell even that value. In other words, so like the kohanim there's a certain value that has something to it that you could sanctify. So let's say a kohen says, look, give me that animal. There's a value of $100, $50 or something, that specific kohen getting it, you could donate the value of who I'm going to donate the sacrifice to. You could also donate that also. It's an interesting thing. Another thing is, if you try to swap the animal, in other words, you have to donate this specific firstborn animal. That's the firstborn. That's what Hashem said. What if you say, I want to switch this on another animal? I'm going to make another animal flip over. I want to remove the status on this animal and make that other animal my firstborn. And guess what? It stays the firstborn, the original one, and the new one also takes on. I'm sorry, that's not what I meant to say. Correction, that's not what Rashi is saying. Rashi's saying is that the example that the Torah gives, using the wool of the sheep and using the larger animals as work, is prohibited. It doesn't mean in other words, they also, using the sheep for work or using the larger animal for its wool, if there is some wool on it, is also prohibited. In other words, you cannot benefit in any way from either of the animals once it's a firstborn it's automatically designated as that requirement of the firstborn animal. It's prohibited to benefit from it in any of the ways. Verse 20. What should you do with it? Should bring it to the Kohen. The Kohen has to eat it in front of us before God, meaning in Jerusalem. Shana b'shana, and so you have to bring up that animal to the Kohen. The Kohen, give it to the Kohen, and the Kohen actually can only eat it in Jerusalem. Now, shana b'shana, every year you should take care of your donation. You know, so imagine someone can give a donation, say, I'm not giving it until 3 years later. So the firstborn animal should be brought up to Jerusalem and eaten by the Kohen, given to the Kohen within the year. You shouldn't really wait 2 years, 3 years. Okay, I'm not going to hold on to the animal. I don't know why you would. You anyway have to give to the Kohen. It doesn't disqualify it if you didn't give your donation within the year, but you should. The correct way to do the mitzvah is to take the animal. You know it's the firstborn. You know that it's required to donate it and do it within the year. And where should you bring it? B'makayim asher yivcha Hashem lekecha Hashem ata v'secha, place that Hashem chooses, you and your household. You should bring it up. The Kohen should eat it into Yerushalayim. So don't, in other words, you can say, okay, I have all these donations sitting around. I'm going to give it a 3 years from now. No, take care of it within the year. Now, what happens if the animal has a blemish? We know, like other sacrifices, if it has a blemish, all of a sudden the owners can eat it. Now, normally what you would do with the firstborn animal, you would give it to the Kohen. The Kohen would eat most of the meat, but he would also sprinkle some of the blood on the altar. He put some fats, different parts of the animal would go and be burnt on the altar. He's telling you here, although it belongs to the Kohen, this firstborn animal, even if it has a blemish, if I understand correctly, you have to still give it to the Kohen. It's not exempt from donating it to the Kohen. However, what it is exempt, it's not allowed to be brought on the altar because you cannot bring a damaged animal to Hashem on the altar. It's just not nice. When giving God a gift, you can't put on the altar. So the Kohen would still receive the firstborn animal if it was blemished, but you would not sacrifice the necessary parts on the animal. He describes here the damage that is done to the animal. If the animal has a blemish, and he goes into details, either it is lame or it's blind, it's an obvious, clear dysfunction on the animal. It's not healthy and it's noticeable. It's something very wrong with it. It's not something that's going to pass. In other words, if it's going to heal, then wait till it heals and then bring it as a sacrifice, no issues. But it's something that's not going to heal. It's a serious blemish. You cannot do with the firstborn that part and bring it on the altar because, as I said before, it's not nice to bring Hashem a gift of a broken, beat up animal that's clearly not healthy. You should eat it within your cities. Now, I think it still goes to the Kohen. I'm not sure about this, but I think it still goes to the Kohen. But it's not holy anymore. It's not. You don't have to eat it in a great holiness as if it was a firstborn holy animal. It could be eaten pure. It could even be eaten impure. Once it's already got blemished, it's not a sacrifice anymore. It's maybe the monetary value that belongs to the Kohen, but it's not it's not a holy sacrifice anymore that can be born on the altar. Rakas dami. Now, so in other words, once it's a serious blemished animal, it loses a lot of its sanctity, its holiness. You could eat it impure, you could eat it, in different ways. I guess not even in Jerusalem, you could eat it where you are. Now, he says, though, you might think, oh, once you're saying this animal doesn't have all the obligations that it originally had, I can do whatever I want with it. Can I eat the blood of the animal? Because I'm not sprinkling the blood on the altar anymore, because it's not a sacrifice. So maybe I'm allowed to eat the blood. So that's what the verse is telling you. No animal is allowed to be eating the blood, even if it's not a sacrifice. A Jew is not allowed to eat the blood of an animal. You have to pour the blood on the ground, pour it on the floor, pour it on the ground. That is the rules regarding this firstborn animal. That concludes, as Parshas Re'eh, the previous Parsha, has been speaking about many of the laws and regulations about this animal. Now, I think he mentioned, I don't know if it's also in Rashi before, we'll see it soon. How long do you have to eat this animal? I believe somewhere here it mentioned that you have 2 days. You have 2 days and 1 night to eat the animal. So there was always a time lot. We're going to see with the Pesach sacrifice, that was one of the most strictest time lots. In other words, how soon after you brought the animal as a sacrifice does the meat of that animal have to be eaten? And he's telling you that the kohen who gets that meat actually has a window of 2 days to eat that meat and 1 night. So the night in between the 2 days and then the 2 days, you have time to finish and eat the sacrifice of the firstborn animal. However, unlike Pesach, we're going to see Pesach sacrifice, they had to literally eat it within that night, which is, I think, the shortest amount of time that the animal can, that a sacrifice needs to be. And let's learn, and we're going to learn now about the 3 holidays, and there's different sacrifices and the times that Jews need to go up to Jerusalem. So we're going to conclude Parshas Re'eh. Shamar es Chodesh Av, something very interesting. Keep the spring month, meaning you should be organized and you should make a calendar. The Jewish calendar, people have to be very organized. And you have to make sure that the holidays are flowing correctly. And specifically, I want, Hashem says, that Pesach should come out in the spring. What's going to happen is, specifically talks about here, that there's a certain sacrifice that they bring on the second day of Pesach, and that is the Omer, the offering of the first ripe of the barley is cut. Now, if the holiday, Pesach would be too early, would still be in the spring, in the winter, hasn't reached full spring yet, then the barley wouldn't have grown, and you can't harvest the barley, which is not, it's not finished yet, it's not ripe. So what are you going to do? You're going to bring, things in the ground still, it's not fully ripe barley yet. So he's telling you that you have to make sure when Pesach comes, since the second day of Pesach, we bring the barley offering representing the grains of the world at that time. We're going to bring a wheat offering on Shavuos, but right now we're bringing the barley offering on the second day of Pesach. So you have to make sure that it's enough on the schedule, the calendar is correct, that the second day of Pesach is late enough in spring that the barley will already be ripe and we'll be able to brought as a sacrifice from ripe barley. Vasisa Pesach LaHashem, and what should you do? Obviously, we all know you should bring the Pesach sacrifice to Hashem. Why? Why do I want, what's the scheduling with this holiday in the spring? Because in the spring, Hashem took you out of Egypt, Laila, at night. So Hashem took you out in the spring. Hashem took you out at night. And therefore, we're going to follow that every year Pesach is going to be the same time. Now, Rashi asks a question. It says, God took us out at night, or God took us out by day? We're very confused. One place it says that Hashem took the Jewish people out by day. Another place here, it says Hashem took us out at night. When exactly did we leave Egypt? Rashi explains what's going on. He says what happened is Pharaoh, as we all know the story, started running after the Jews, saying, get out of Mitzrayim, get out of Egypt, I want you to leave. When did Pharaoh run after the Jews and tell them to leave Egypt? Rashi explains, at night. That's correct. That's what the verse here says. Hashem sent you out at night because they already got permission. They already were being demanded to leave. But another place, because they actually left, I guess it took a little bit of time to get their small stuff together and get out, that actually was during the daytime. But the beginning of the redemption, their pushing of the Egyptians to the Jews to leave already happened that night. Verse 2, you should bring the Pesach sacrifice to your God, to Hashem. You should bring a sheep. You should bring either a sheep or a goat, like we'll see, which is this famous Pesach sacrifice that we always bring. Uvakar and cattle, meaning that in addition, there were actually 2 sacrifices brought at that time, because as Rashi explains, they would eat it as a big family together. All the cousins would get together and they would eat the Pesach sacrifice. And I think it could only be a year old within the first year. So whatever you sacrifice, a goat or a sheep, was a very small animal. Let's say you had 30 people, 40 people, whatever it was in the family, all got together. How much meat would there already be? How much could you wasn't a big animal. So you'd also bring another chagiga, a sacrifice for the holiday, not specifically for Pesach, but like any holiday, you brought a holiday gift. And that could be brought from a larger animal, and you'd basically eat the larger animal first, fill up your stomach, have your full course, and then for dessert, you'd have the next meat course, which is I guess like today we have a fish course and a meat course, maybe they would have a meat course and another meat course, and that would be whatever, divide equally among the family, a piece of whatever the animal size was, a piece for everybody to enjoy the Pesach sheep, goat, Pesach sacrifice. And where should you do all this? Of course, in the place that Hashem will choose, because Hashem has not chosen Yerushalayim yet. It'll only be chosen a few hundred years later, where King David will discover the location, and by the location, as we learned in Chumash earlier, over there is where you should celebrate the holiday of Pesach. He goes into some of the laws of not eating chametz. Let's see, l'seichel olav chametz. You should not eat leaven with it. We should get rid of the leaven. Shivas yamim. For 7 days, seichel olav matzah. You should eat matzah. Matzah is lechem oni, which is poor man's bread. And Rashi explains what's the point of the matzah is because it's the food we ate in Egypt when we were slaves, because the Jews, could you imagine, the Egyptians didn't want to spend too much money. They basically gave them flour and water, no spices. And it wasn't, as we're going to see, Rising has one point that it was very hard food that slaves ate to remind us of our slavery. Also, the second famous reason, is also to remember the haste that you were chased out of Egypt. Egyptians chased the Jews out. Again, they didn't have time to allow the dough to rise and do it like a good bakery food like they would normally do. And again, Hashem wants us to eat the foods that replicate, that remind us of that time. And Hashem wanted you to do it. Remember, through eating the food of that original time, to remember the going out of Egypt that Hashem took you out for the rest of your life. And during that time, you shouldn't have, not just at the meal or so on, in your whole property, you shouldn't have in your possession any leavening in your house during the 7 days. Shivas yamim. So you shouldn't have for 7 days. And I want to just share something. Rashi explains there that we're talking about the first day of Pesach from the 14th day, which is the day before, when we burn the chametz, the day before the holiday starts, the day before the Seder begins. And he says something interesting. He says, I wanted a few points here. One place he says 6 days you should eat matzah. Another place he says 7 days you should eat matzah. So which one is correct? And we're not even talking about in America, out of Israel, where we celebrate Pesach for 8 days. Well, let's just go to the Israeli calculation. Within Israel, one place it says that matzah is eaten for 7 days, and one place it says matzah is eaten for 6 days. So there's one or two ways to answer this question. Easy. One answer is the seventh day, the first day, it's an obligation and a requirement to eat matzah. But the rest of the days of Pesach, it is you cannot eat chametz, but you don't have to eat matzah. In other words, the only obligation that you must eat matzah is on the first day. But if you want to go gluten-free and not eat either one, you want to eat neither chametz nor matzah, no problem. Eat fruit and vegetables for the rest of the Pesach. So that's why it says 6 days and 7, because 7 complete days, but 6 days are not an obligation to differentiate between the two. Is one of the answers over here, and so on. Now let me add another point or two here. The layalin min habasar, that meat that you eat, it's such a strong requirement of the freshness of it. That meat cannot be left over. You're not allowed to leave over for the rest of Pesach. You want to enjoy that meat. No. It cannot be left over that night. It should be the first day until the morning. So basically like this. During the midday, as Rashi explains, from the afternoon before Pesach, the Pesach Seder is that afternoon before the 14th day of Nisan. From afternoon time and up, after midday, is the right time to sacrifice that Pesach sacrifice. Then after nightfall, when the Seder starts, that night, that's the right time to eat the Korban Pesach. And you only have until the morning to make sure to finish every piece of meat that is in the sacrifice. However, if there's leftover, you take it to the location which you will burn it. I guess you're not allowed to burn it, as Rashi says here, because it's still Pesach. But you'll bring it at least to the place, if there is leftover, whatever's left over, you'll bring it to the location where it will be burnt after the holiday will finish, and you're allowed to burn it. But you're not allowed to leave over. There's no leftovers allowed to the next morning. You're not allowed to bring the Pesach sacrifice within any of your holy cities. In other words, today we do the Pesach Seder wherever we want. But because we don't have the Pesach sacrifice, but if we would have the Pesach sacrifice, we would all be required to all together, would be pretty cool, pretty amazing, go up to Yerushalayim and bring the Pesach sacrifice over there. Kiyam el hamakim, but to the place that God will choose a few hundred years after this. To rest is named there. Tizbachas HaPesach, that's only location which you should bring this Pesach sacrifice. Ba'erev kivay HaShemesh, as it gets night time. Shemesh mayetzeschem in Mitzrayim, because why does Hashem want us to eat it at night? Because that is the time that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. I guess that's when Pari came running, telling the Jews they should leave. And they left that morning. That's the exact time Hashem wants us to replicate it, to remember the time and celebrate Pesach exactly at that time. And you should roast it, because the way it was like a shawarma, basically. The way that they would cook it would be like on a spindle, and it would roast like on a fire, like a shawarma. That's the kind of way Hashem wants us to eat it. And you should eat it in the place that Hashem chose. And then you should turn away and go back home. Fine, after you celebrate the Pesach Seder there, you could go back home. But Rashi says something very interesting. I don't want you running home, which means at that night, I guess like a lot of people go away for Shabbos to a friend's house. A lot of times Saturday night, they leave. Hashem says, I don't want you to leave that night. I want you to sleep over, also stay the second night. That night that the holiday ends, I don't want you running out of Yerushalayim. I want you to sleep over that second night and only then leave Yerushalayim. Sheishes Yom Techel Matzah, for 6 days you should eat matzah. You said Yom Shvi Atzeres L'Hashem Lekecha, and on the 7th day you should stop. As Rashi explains, what does Atzeres mean? You shouldn't work. You shouldn't work on the 7th day. Now, I want to add something I mentioned before. I read this Rashi earlier already. I said the difference between 6 and 7 days. Why does sometimes it say 6? See, the verse here says 6 days you should eat matzahs, and the verse earlier says you should be 7. And they already explained one of the answers that Rashi gives there is that because the first day is an obligation, you must eat matzah. The other 6 is just permission. You don't have to actually eat matzah. Another difference is, he says here, the difference between 6 and 7, interesting difference. He says, look, the sacrifice of the Omer that you're going to bring is on the 2nd day of Pesach. Once you bring that barley offering, that allows the grains that grew this new year to be eaten. Before then, you were not allowed to use the new grains until we bring the sacrifice to Hashem. You're not allowed to use and eat from the new grains. The barley sacrifice allows the new grains to be eaten. So when you ate the matzah on the first night of Pesach, that had to be from the old grains, because you went to the matzah bakery, they couldn't use the new grains yet. So, but the next 6 days, once the barley sacrifice has been brought, you're now allowed to eat the matzahs over Pesach from the new barley, and that's why he differentiates between 6. Sometimes he says 6, and sometimes he says 7. Another interesting answer by Rashi. On the 7th day, the last day of Pesach, you shouldn't work, you should stop. You shouldn't do any work on that day. You should make a meal, you should have drink and get together and so on. Shiva Shavua Istismar Lach. And then what happens after Pesach? We followed it up with counting for 7 weeks. From the time that the sickle is first put to the standing crop, which is the beginning of when you start to cut the first sacrifice, right? For the 2nd day of Pesach, we know we also start counting the Omer. That's from when the sacrifice will be brought. You would start to cut the new barley. After the barley sacrifice was cut, you'd start to cut the new grains. So I want you to start counting on the 2nd day of Pesach, 7 weeks. What do we do after the 7 weeks? Everybody knows. You should make the holiday of Shavuos to Hashem your God. What sacrifices should you bring on the holiday of Shavuos? You should bring however much Hashem blesses you. Whatever you think is the right amount. In other words, based on your income, based on the blessing, that is the Karban Shalmi Simcha, which is different sacrifices that would peace offerings that they would bring to represent the happiness and all the blessings that Hashem gave us. That was a chance to bring that kind of donation, give how much you want. And you should invite guests and people to come eat with you, make a real party, and make a meal, and invite everybody to come join you. And you should rejoice before Hashem your God. Ato, vanecho, vitecha, vavdecha. He says, bring you, your sons, your daughters. There's 4 categories here. Vavdecha, your manservants, and your maidservants. So he's going to say, Rashi is going to say, I will bless them if you take care of my four groups. I'll take care of your 4 groups. Your sons, your daughters, your manservants, and your maidservants. If you take care of Halevi, Asher b'sharecha, the Levite that's in your midst, V'hager, and the converts amongst you, V'hayasim, V'almana, and the orphans and the widows. Hashem says, you take care of my 4 categories, the converts, the orphan, the widow, and the Levites, and I will take care of your sons, your daughters, your manservants, and your maidservants. In the place, again, where do you do all this celebration? Again, 5 weeks later, back in Jerusalem for the holiday of Shavuos. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. And Rashi says, why is he telling us to remember now here at this point that we're slaves in Egypt? That why did Hashem take us out? In order that you should keep all my commandments. You should take care of, I guess, the orphan and the widow and do Pesach and Shavuos, as I'm telling you. And you should keep all these commandments, all these statutes that you're getting. Then he moves on to the final and third holiday. You should also keep the holiday of Sukkot. Shivas Yamim for 7 days. See, everything's around the harvesting and the season. So remember, Pesach was when the spring started, when stuff first started to grow. What happens in Sukkot? It's very interesting how the 3 holidays are based in that time. The holiday of, I guess, first of all, the holiday of Shavuos, which I didn't mention it, is when the everything finished growing. It's in the field and you're starting to cut it and so on. Here, what happens in Sukkot? Things dried out in the fields and so on. And ba'asbacha, you're gathering in from your threshing floor for the produce and your vat. You know, you've already processed the stuff. You've already dried them. And you're putting everything into the storage house. You feel very rich, you know, with all these things. You should celebrate then the holiday of Sukkot. It also tells you why is he quoting, bringing in from your threshing floor and your vat, because he's also describing the schach that one should put on their sukkah that are made over, the branches that are left over from all this stuff. And you should rejoice in your holidays. Your sons, your daughters, your manservants and your maidservants. And include the Levites, and the converts, also in the holiday of Sukkot, the orphans and the widows. That's in your gates. Shivas Yamim Tachai Hashem, also it should be a 7-day holiday. Again, and you again go up to the location that Hashem will choose. We know which is today Yerushalayim. And you rejoice and celebrate with all the blessings that Hashem has given you, with all your grain and all your handwork that you do. And you'll be happy. Now, either you could read it be happy, as Rashi says, to mean you'll be happy because things will be good. Another meaning is they bring from the Talmud that you have to make sure to also make a special celebration and a holiday on the last day of Sukkot, I guess like you did by Pesach, also by Sukkot. As a whole, 3 times a year, all males have an obligation to go up to Jerusalem. As Pnei Hashem Lekecha should go up to see Hashem. And what does he mean by see? He means don't come empty-handed. Bring with you also the burnt offering, the burnt offerings as a seeing gift. Here, Hashem, I'm here. Here's a burnt offering for you, as well as the Shalmei Chagiga. I said before. Also, you have to bring the peace offerings that you're going to eat and partake in the holiday happiness offerings that you're bringing with you. Chag HaMatzos, and it's 3 times a year. Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos, on Pesach, on Shavuos, and on Sukkot. Well, you shouldn't come empty-handed. Always, you have to come with a gift to Hashem. How much should you bring? Each man, like the gift of his hands, how much Hashem blessed him, that Hashem gave you, should make sure to bring with you the full amount that Hashem gave you. That's the amount that you should bring with you. And that is the end of today's